Hi, Jim. Thanks for joining us today.
No worries. How are you?
I'm doing well. Where in the world are you calling us from?
I'm in Seattle, actually Redmond, Washington. There's a small little company here called Microsoft that kind of used to dominate everything. Now we got a little bit of Amazon and a little bit of everything else out here now. So,
A little more diversity.
yeah,
Yeah, the tech funnel up there is definitely pulling in more. Although so many of the pieces with AI, which we're going to talk about today, has been impacting jobs on the big scale, like organizations like theirs.
yeah, I
But
know
let's
Amazon just laid off a bunch of people and shifted a bunch of people over to AI, and everybody's doing that. Even Microsoft has laid off a number of their programmers and other people, and focusing what they can on AI. As that seems to be their strategy for the future, and I think it works for all of us. So.
absolutely. Now, do you feel like more what they're showing, obviously, is there's absolutely headcount reduction. There's a lot of speculation that there's been effectively job destruction as a result of some of the changes that are going in. But that's on the big scale. Do you feel like on a smaller scale, there's the same impacts, or is it different for small business?
Well, I think small businesses, it's interesting. We've looked at outsourcing some services out of the Philippines. We've done some stuff out of Pakistan in the past, and that may be stuff that we switch over to just having AI do it. And it is making things easier to, we do a lot of international stuff. So, for example, I had a contract that we're negotiating with some Egyptians and some UAE out of Dubai on a farm in Egypt and a farm in Zimbabwe. And one of the problems we have is the different laws. And, I could spend my time and lots of money trying to figure out what, the legal aspects of it are. And even in Seattle here, we got a lot of great attorneys, but do I have an attorney here that understands the laws between Dubai and Egypt and Zimbabwe and the United States? Probably not. And if I did, I would be paying hundreds and if not thousands, probably thousands of dollars an hour. I can put all the scenario into WhatsApp into a question, and to get, within seconds, it gives me, here's the things to consider, here's the outline. So that takes, that aspect of my business. I don't have to worry about that. Now it's not perfect. I still have to review it and kind of reconcile it. And in some cases, and particularly in this case, for example, it was too complicated for my people in Egypt. They're like, no, let's keep it simple. Kind of a handshake type of deal, as opposed to stock options and different things there that the program recommended that made sense to me. But again, dealing on an international basis, it did not necessarily make sense. So we're going to find situations where things that we would hire out, we do a lot of research, for the United Nations and EBRD, European Bank Reconstruction Development, and others. And I would hire people to do that in the past, not anymore. Now I can just hit a couple of buttons and tell it, here's the scenario. And again, it's not perfect. I had it do some research on citrus exports out of Egypt the other day and sent it to my lady in Egypt who does a lot of citrus exports. She goes, where'd this list come from? These people, yeah, they export, but they're not the players. They're not the main players, because it just basically picks up, what's out there and what people have said, and, from their own websites and stuff. So it can make people look better than they are. And I'm sure it can make people look worse than they are. But we would in the past hire people, whether it's people in the U.S. or elsewhere, to do research. And now I don't need to do that. I can, kind of synchronize it and condense it to be easy with a question with AI. And again, you have to recheck it, confirm it, check the logic on it. Excuse me. So yeah, we see it changing, our staff, and how we do things and how we move forward.
No, I agree with you, Jim. I think that's a big piece is there's still a people in the process step, right? You've got to make sure you validate what it's told you.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a daughter who's getting her PhD in fishery economics, which is a pretty complex topic, and she hates it because she says, anybody can go on and ask it a question, and it'll generate an answer. Doesn't mean the answer's right, but you don't have to be. You have to be able to understand what's wrong with it, but you don't have to understand what's wrong with it to think it's right and to ask it a question. So you really it empowers everybody if you know how to use it, but it also can give you a lot of inaccurate information or inaccurate information. So you really have to be able to sift through it, and not everybody's going to be able to do that. I think when we look at some of the countries that we deal with, Bangladesh and Thailand, and some of those where labor is intensive. and a lot of their jobs are going to be replaced with AI. We had robots replacing some of it in the past, but now between artificial intelligence and the ability to do things perfectly, from a manufacturing standpoint. I heard a story about Boeing up here where they used to inspect every part when it came in with the human eye. And occasionally they'd use a X-ray machine or something else to take a picture of it. Now you don't need that human eye anymore, and the computer is going to be much more accurate than a person looking at it and going, "Wait, we're 1/1000th of a centimeter off or millimeter off." The computer and AI and the technology is going to do that. So there's going to be a big shift in a lot of those labor-intensive jobs, and even outside the United States, where we've benefited and countries have benefited from low labor costs. But a lot of those labor jobs are going to be replaced with technology, with AI. So,
So displacement, I think that's a good point. We've been talking a lot about displacement here in the United States, and the easy focus everyone picks up is Uber drivers, of course, with Waymo and other autonomous taxis coming to market at this point. But you're saying it's not just about our labor market; it's also the low-cost labor globally.
yeah, low cost labor globally, it's one of the things I always have an argument with here when and Seattle's notorious for it. We've got a great minimum wage. I think their minimum wage is like $18 an hour. But every time you go higher in the minimum wage, it becomes more and more efficient to go with technology. You go to the grocery store now and you've got 2 lanes that are self-checkout. Those self-checkouts used to be humans. And so we've raised the price of the labor, and all of a sudden the technology begins to make sense. You go to an airport now, and a lot of the airports, you can order your food from a computer sitting at your table, and somebody brings it. So you've eliminated jobs at that level because it's much more efficient and easier to do it with technology. And like I say, the self checkouts are when you go into a Costco store now. You used to stand in line for sometimes an hour to get through a Costco line with the human people there. Now you've got, in that same amount of space, you've got probably 9 checkout stands, all with one person watching them. So there's jobs that are lost there. So we're going to see jobs lost because as wages go up, and they do, just from inflation and everything else, and technology costs go down. Technology, every day goes cheaper because of the competition out there. It's one of the things that hasn't increased in cost. It's decreased in cost with competition. Even though you've got some major players that dominate the industry, there's still enough competition that the real cost of things go down. And as they go down, the trade-off for human labor becomes more appealing to go with technology.
Absolutely, I know that's a piece of what we were going to see some time ago. Let's say pre-COVID, there was arguments around how older people were not retiring and starting to take on, they finished their career, and now rather than just going and playing golf, they would go take a job at McDonald's, right? So now all of a sudden, this job that was meant for, in theory, a high schooler or someone trying to get through college has now been taken by somebody who's retired, and maybe wants extra income or make ends meet. And if you're the McDonald's manager, are you going to pick this experienced, capable individual with a proven track record of being on time, or are you going to take a teenager, right? And I think it's kind of hard. So that was happening. And now, to your point, we've seen McDonald's deploy one of the first fully automated
Yeah,
McDonald's in Texas,
yeah,
where one person can run the whole store 24/7.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's again another thing from an economic standpoint that always amazes me when people, they're 40 years old and they're still making minimum wage. And minimum wage is not meant for a 40-year-old. You've made a mistake somewhere along the way, or you've opted, out of the job force or whatever. But it's not that, when people say, "Oh, I can't afford to support my family on minimum wage," it's like, well, you're 40 years old. You shouldn't be making minimum wage. Minimum wage is meant for a starting career. It's the kids in high school, or it's meant for the older people that are going, okay, I need a little bit of income. With Social Security, you can't make too much money. Because as soon as you start making money on Social Security, they start taking it away from you. So there's a sweet spot there, and there's a lot of jobs, that are being replaced, and it's a challenge out there. Minimum wage goes up, the opportunities actually go down, not the other way around. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And
There's
technology,
always,
as technology becomes cheaper, there's going to be more and more discoveries that we don't need to do this with people. The lawyers that I'm replacing with just being able to ask the questions. That's thousands of dollars off my bottom line or onto my bottom line because I'm not paying it out to somebody. I'm paying for a service on AI, and it's not perfect. I still will, I've got to redo my will here. I'll use AI to generate it, and then I'll send it to my attorney and say, did this make sense? So I'm just paying this much versus this much to get the same thing done.
Absolutely. And we know there's some impact there. I think it's a big piece of what the argument continues to be. If you're, let's say, a lawyer who works with AI, you're going to be more efficient. You might even be able to get more out of every day, but you're working with more clients, right? Because the client's looking for the less expensive solution. You're looking to make sure you maintain your role in the industry.
Well, yeah, one of the basic things on economics is you can make a salary, you can leverage your income. And, I make money off of what I pay other people. So if I hire somebody for $10 an hour, I'm charging $12 an hour for it. So I'm making a profit on that. And, using AI as that $10 employee that I'm leveraging makes me much more efficient. And in the case of AI, I'm not paying them $10 an hour. I'm paying $20 a month or whatever it is to get that service. So it does replace those things pretty efficiently. Um,
I think something you'd hint at is we're going to see potentially all this impact globally, not just U.S. labor, but global labor. But let's say the citrus, right? The citrus is still in other countries. So do you think we're going to see a movement of manufacturing is an obvious one? Because if we can get low cost robots to produce our automobiles or phones or the things we still want to have made, that we're going to buy, versus some things that are sourced, like mines have to be mined and fruit has to be grown. Do you see us working to move what we can into the country as well, so that the sourcing's more local, or do you think we'll still use sourced, a
That, that's
citrus?
that's a that's a political question, depending on what side of the spectrum you're on there.
Okay.
U.S. We don't manufacture because we can, and a lot of things because we can do it cheaper someplace else. And I don't see U.S. workers going, I'm going to manufacture this left-handed widget that I can get done in Afghanistan or China or Bangladesh someplace cheaper. We just aren't going to do those type of jobs. Same thing with the farm labor. You're not going to find somebody with even an associate's degree going, oh, I want to go work on the farm and bend over and cut the asparagus that needs to be cut every day. Those are jobs that are better outsourced to someplace else. It's called the comparative and competitive advantage. They've got the advantage. We're looking at these blueberry farms in other countries. And if you think about it, the labor in those other countries, even a good paying job is $2 a day or even $3 a day. And a job up here in Whatcom County in Washington State is $18 an hour. Okay, so you got the job and you got the labor, but you also have the land. What's the cost of land up in Whatcom County versus the cost of land in Zimbabwe? And then you got the taxes, and then you got the distribution system. One of the things that got me was when President Trump says we're going to lower the price of drugs in the United States. Well, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, that's great. We shouldn't be paying more than anybody else, except for the fact it costs a lot more to get it licensed. It takes a lot more time to get it into the system. Our distribution's a lot more expensive. Our advertising's a lot more expensive. So getting it there, it's not just a function of what is the drug company making. It's what are all these other costs associated with it that really add on to it that you can't, in theory, it's great. We're going to bring our prices down to the world level, but we're not the world. Our cost of distribution is so much higher. Our cost of labor is higher. And it's efficient. One of the things, I was in India several years ago, and we were at a refrigeration conference, and one of the guys got up, and I think he was with Carey, the air conditioning company. He goes, the thing about it is, United States has 300 million people, and we've got like 40,000, 50,000, I don't remember the exact number, of refrigerated trucks. China or India that has 1.2 billion. He says there's somewhere around 800 refrigerated trucks.
Oh my goodness.
And he says,
And
so
does
if
that just
you're
reflect our
getting
willingness to pay?
well, and so he goes, the thing about it is there's so few of them, so it's going to be used by the pharmaceutical companies that have to keep that temperature down, or it's going to be used by the ice cream companies. He says even these big restaurants and these big hotels, a 4-star hotel, chances of their meat being in a cold chain throughout import or slaughter distribution and making it to the restaurant is very small. So, and that's changing as their economies go up, and it's changing as people go, I'm staying at a Marriott. I don't expect to get sick when I eat the food. And you think that when you're staying at a Marriott, the standards are all going to be the same, and whether it's a Marriott or Hilton or whatever, you think that you're going to be safe, and most likely you are, because they have HACCP and they have the other standards in place to make sure that it's checked. Because if people started getting sick, and we see that in Mexico, when people start getting sick at a resort, people stop going to the resort. So part of it's our willingness to pay. Part of it's just the system that we've got, and the safety measures that are in place. And it's efficiency. You go to some of these countries and their produce is sold in a wet market, and you'll see, there's a place in Moscow called Food City, and there's probably 200 people that sell citrus there. Well, the ones on the edge of the market are selling. The ones in the middle aren't selling. So how much is the waste that they have there versus what we do here? There's not as much waste, though food waste is a huge, total different topic. And AI will actually at some point in time help minimize that by making things more efficient. You'll be able to control the supply chain. One of the things in Japan, even 20 years ago, people were, the grocery stores are small. You got a 7-Eleven or a small retail store. And they would have it so when things come across the scanner and get scanned, the order goes back to the supplier saying they moved 1 can of cola, they moved 1 can of corn, and there were some retailers that were getting a delivery an hour, and they're in small trucks because they don't have the big roads and the semis that we do. But their supply chain was called just-in-time distribution. Their supply chain was fit and designed so that product was maximizing the turn of the product on the shelf. And then again, AI is going to influence that technology. That was just barcode then. One of the things that people are trying to do now, and we've tried to do this again about 20 years ago, was RFID, radio frequency identification. And at the time, I think it was Walmart had a standing order for millions of chips to go on their product because they wanted to be able to track product in their store. They wanted people to be able to, and we see that now with the Amazon Go stores. People can just walk out with product. That's because there's cameras there and seeing what you're doing. But if you had a radio frequency identification chip on each label, when you pass through the door, you get charged. And we're going to see more and more of that happen. And that does impact labor because you don't need somebody running that cash register. There are stores. You go to an airport, the kiosks that are there, you're checking out yourself. There's one person who's kind of watching to make sure you do it. But it's used to be 2 or 3 people, 1 person stocking and 2 cashiers. Not anymore. And those were lower paying jobs. Low skilled jobs. I don't want to say they're not skilled, but it's you don't have to have a master's to be able to run a cash register at an airport.
Don't you need an associate? So you seem to be able to be taught how to run the register.
Well, and that's the thing too. One of the things in the U.S. we all think we all need associates and masters and PhDs and bachelors and stuff. I've got some friends that are in these services industry that are doing air conditioning and the HVAC and carpeting and everything else, and our painters, the people that paint at our house. They're working. Yeah, they start early. They're working at 7 o'clock, but they're done at 3. And they go home and they don't have to worry about, gee, what am I going to do tomorrow? Is my boss going to be mad? Did I make these sales? And they're making good money. So, and that's one thing I think we've emphasized here is it's better to have a degree, even if it's in something that's not marketable. But it's not necessarily the fact anymore. We still need the service people. We still need the people that are going to, paint the houses and do the plumbing. Our plumbers get paid well these days. Electricians get paid well these days. And they have to have an education. You have to be able to do it. But you don't need a degree in, art science or art history or political science or, even chemistry. You just need to be able to understand the skills that you got. And it's, apprenticeships and mentors. That's something we moved away from. It used to be that, people would bring people in and they were their apprentice and somebody was your mentor. And I had a mentor when I first started out. And it's one of those things that we've moved away from. We expect people to show up at the job ready to go and capable of doing it. And that's a thing too, is if people don't understand how to use the AI, they're going to fall behind. There are people out there that's like, I hate AI. I can tell when something's written in AI and it gives me the wrong information. It's like, true. You have to know enough to filter it out, but it sure makes a lot of things easy. I had a contract the other day from my insurance policy. You get those and they're this thick, right? Who's going to read them?
Yes.
AI. No. Load it up onto AI. I said, give me the 10 points that I need to consider in this. Boom. It's there. It's like, oh wow, I wouldn't have caught that one phrase down there at the bottom of the page. So it's definitely gonna change things.
Agreed. No, I think you're right. I do believe the safest jobs, at least in the short term, are absolutely trades. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, those are the things, and the robots are going to have to be fixed too. So learning, repair, and understanding the physical components, and that's going to be safe for a while. Until someone had said, we're building the first generation of robots. Robots will build the second generation of robots.
Yeah, yeah.
So at least until that happens, we can do the trades for a while. I've also heard a report. There's more students right now coming out with 2 degrees, bachelors, rather than just getting one when they're doing their 4 years in school, and that is helping them currently because they stand out a little more than the person who just got one. But to your point, in the long run, may not be what's important.
Yeah, I went to college and I didn't do a great job in the academic end, but I got a lot of leadership skills. I was vice president of student body and really focused on developing myself, not necessarily my academics. I've learned so much more since I got out. My writing is so much better. Part of it's helped by AI and Grammarly and that type of stuff. But everything's, I continue to learn and continue to try and improve myself. And that's something a lot of people, when you graduate from college, you expect, hey, I got 2 degrees, I expect a job. And you hear this all the time. Well, I did what society wanted me to do. I went and got my degree. Yeah, I'm $100,000 in debt with my student loans, and I got a job that's going to pay $30,000 a year, 40,000, even 50,000. You got to do the cost benefit analysis there and say, wait a minute, I'm paying $100,000 for my education for a job that's not going to pay me enough to pay off the loans.
Yeah,
But people would go, I did my job. I went to college because that's what society expected. And society, it does value education. But there's a lot of education out there. There's a lot of education to be had. I've got one of my friends from college. He retired, well before I will retire, and he worked for a long time as a HVAC installer. He would do his 60 hours a week, so he's getting his 40-hour pay, plus he's getting overtime. And he lives a great life now because he worked really hard, but he had no formal education. He learned how to do the HVAC, and he was very good at it. Um, and I don't see that type of physical labor being, like, say, the robots may be able to do part of it, and they'll definitely be able to do some of the inspections and that type of stuff because they're going to be more accurate in their reading of, the fits and that type of stuff. But you're still going to need people, and same thing even in the factories. If you got a factory that's sewing my shirt together, that can be done by a robot, but you're still going to need somebody overseeing it. You're still going to need somebody repairing it, somebody keeping the updates on the system. You got to keep the electricity going, and those are all things
absolutely.
that so far AI hasn't quite figured out how to do that.
Now, yes. Well, Jim, this was great. I appreciate the time today. Is there any parting thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
No, I guess the only parting thought on AI is don't miss the boat, but don't count on the boat to get you where you're going without directing it. So you want to make sure that you're aware of what's going on, what the options are, but you don't want to depend on it fully because it's not going to be the end all to everything. At least at this stage, it's learning more every day. It was funny. I read something the other day where some of the questions that the AI was answering, even the program designers couldn't figure out how they were coming up with those answers. And you
Yeah,
think about it. I was thinking the other day, my degree's in agricultural economics. I'm like, I could go back into commodity trading. It's like, wait a minute. There's a computer out there that knows that it rained in Australia. It knows it didn't rain in Ethiopia, and knows that, the prices or the consumption in the United States is up or down or whatever. It can take in all that information. It would take me forever. When I was in the grain trade, we'd get up in the morning, we'd go in and go to the Teletech machine, and we'd read the tape on what was going on weather-wise. Now the computer can not only read what's going on, it can give it, based on everything that's going on, based on what you've loaded in as your parameters, here's what's going to happen. So it's taken a complex world and kind of narrowed it down to where everything's available, but not everything that's available is correct.
yeah. No, exactly. And it just keeps getting faster. Well, Jim, I really
Yep.
appreciate the time today. I think what I heard there was don't miss the ship, but make sure you're the captain. Be,
Yeah.
be the captain of your ship.
And you have a life
That's
raft.
good. Yes,
So,
a life raft. That's good.
yep.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate it as well.